Hello, in this video I'm going to be talking about the reduce method built into arrays in ES5 JavaScript and beyond. So I have some example data here, a few number arrays and an array of these objects, these exam score records with name properties and result properties that represent a score. So the first thing I want to do is, without using the reduce method, how can we accomplish certain tasks? So without using reduce, compute the sum of the values in set 3. Okay, so set 3 up here, basically we want to add all these numbers up. So I created a function called compute sum. It takes a parameter called array. Now just a note here, I'm using TypeScript. You don't have to use TypeScript. So just ignore this type annotation right here and just worry about ARR if you are using JavaScript. So I have this function, compute sum, takes an array, and first of all, we are starting off with sum being 0. Because I'm computing a sum, I'm just adding a bunch of numbers. I can take advantage of the 0 property of addition and just safely start with 0 as my running sum as I'm keeping track of this. The next thing I do is I create a for loop, and I'm looping through the array. And what I'm doing here is I'm incrementing the value of sum by the current value in the array. So that's a shorthand, that plus equals. It's the same as saying sum equals sum plus array at index I. So that's the same thing. But I'm going to keep the shorthand. So sum plus equals array at index I. And once that for loop concludes, once we've gone through every element there, we're going to return the sum. And so that's how you would call it. We would call this function and we would pass in the array and we would get our answer back. So that's without using reduce. And so let's see an example of how we can use reduce and what even is reduce. Well, reduce, it works great for finding the sum of an array of numbers, but that's not the only thing it's for. Basically, reduce is used anytime you have an array of values and you have some way of boiling that down into a single piece of information. So an example might be the sum or the average or the difference of those numbers. There are many other uses of reduce. Those are the ones I can think of right now. Those are the simplest to demonstrate. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. So how do we use reduce? Well, it's a method built into an array. So first we have to have an array. So compute the sum of the values in set 3. So I'm going to call set3 dot, and this is going to be reduce. And reduce takes a callback function as its argument. Now for the callback function, I'm going to be using an ES6 arrow function. Now the first thing that you pass in to this is actually going to be, I'm going to put ACC here. Of course, you can name these whatever you want, but the ACC, VS Code is calling this the previous value. I like to refer to this as the accumulator. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. So the first thing is the accumulator. The next thing we're going to call val. That's going to be the current value. So this callback function is going to be executed for each item in the original array. So if you have 10 items in the array, this is going to get called 10 times. Well, not exactly. It'll be called 9 times. You'll see. So ACC value. You can keep going. You can also get the index. So this will be 0, 1, 2. So this is the index, the position in the original array. And also you can keep going again, and you can actually get the entire array every single time if you need it. For this one, we're just going to need the accumulator and the value. So those are the only 2 parameters I need. Okay, so how does this work exactly? The way the reduce function works and what the accumulator is a value. Remember I said that you're taking the array and you're boiling it down to some reduced final simple value. That is what we are accumulating. So the accumulator persists across multiple executions of this callback. It's this value that we're building toward. So when you don't specify an original accumulator, it's going to start as the first element in the array when you're using reduce. So for set 3, the accumulator is actually going to start as 12, and the value is going to start at 17, so that you don't accidentally add the first number twice. So that automatically happens for you. If you don't specify an initial accumulator, then the accumulator is the first item, and then value starts at 17, and then the next time is 22, 29, 31, and so on. So what we can do is what you do in here is you return what the next accumulator should be, right? So you have to think forward into the future. So let's imagine this. We're in set 3 right now, and I told you that the accumulator is going to be 12 and the current value is 17. So what do we want the next accumulator to be? Well, our goal is to create a sum here. We want to add all these numbers up. So the next time this runs, we want the accumulator to not just be 12, we want it to be the result of 12 added to 17. So we want to return 12 plus 17 as our next accumulator. And then the next time it runs, we're going to take this value plus 22, plus 29, plus 31, and so on. So we're just incrementing that accumulator as we go along. So in here, I'm going to return ACC plus val. Okay, so I'm returning what the accumulator is going to be the next time around. So I don't want to just return ACC, it'll never change, right? It's just, we're always returning ACC, it's never going to change. I need to say, all right, for the next accumulator, it's going to be ACC plus this next thing, okay? So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to console log set3 here. No, this returns a result, so let sum equal, or we can just say answer, and I'm going to console log answer, okay? Now I'm using TypeScript. I have a custom build process set up, so just bear with me here. However you run this code, whether it's in the front end in a browser, just in a JS file you pull in with a script tag, or it's a Node.js file that you run, this code is the same, this bit that I've selected right here. So don't get too distracted by me using TypeScript or anything like that. So the answer is 111, and indeed, if you go through and add all of these numbers up, you will get 111. Quick note here, I did say that the accumulator starts by default as the very first item in the array, but you can override that. So you can do, it's like this would start at, this would say start with 0 as the accumulator. Now if you pass an initial default accumulator, then value does start at the very front of the array. It would start with 12 this time. So it'd be 0 plus 12 plus 17. So the answer actually wouldn't change when we're using addition, again, because it's a 0 property of addition. So most of the time, it makes sense for the accumulator to start as the first element in the array, and that's fine. Just showing you right here that if you do need to change that, it's just the second argument. So after the callback, you can pass in whatever you want the accumulator to start out with. And when you do that, value is going to start out as at the front of the array instead of the second item in the array. I'm going to go back to the way we had it. So compute the product for all the values in set 3. Also do this for set 4. Oh, well, let's finish this one. So now we're going to say answer is equal to set3.reduce. Now I'm going to use an ES6 arrow function shorthand. So I've got my accumulator and my value, and it looks a little ugly. Let me put some spacing here. What's going on? Well, on the left-hand side, nothing changed. Normally, you can drop these parentheses if you have just one single parameter. That's not the case here, so we have to keep the parentheses. On the right-hand side of the arrow function, this is an implied return shorthand. So what that means is if you drop the curly braces, then that means that whatever expression is to the right of the arrow function is going to be returned by the callback. So it's literally exactly the same as this. So here's the long version, here's the short version. So decide on which one you like. Arguably, this one is not as readable. Someone not familiar with arrow functions would have a difficult time understanding that. Okay, so now I want to console log my answer. And I actually just did the same thing. Let's change this to set4.reduce. There we go. and run my code. So 111 should be the first answer, and 10 should be the second answer. This one will be easier to prove. So 4 plus 3, or starting from the left, 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, and 6 plus 4 is 10. So that's our final answer there. Okay, moving on to the next example. Compute the product of all the values in set 3. Also do this for set 4. So in this one, I'm going to say answer is equal to set3.reduce. Again, taking the accumulator and the value, and I'm going to return the accumulator multiplied by the current value. All right, so we're basically taking all the numbers and multiplying. So 12 times 17 times 22 times 29 times 31, and so on. All right, so let me console log that. And I'll go ahead and code the next one. So answer equals set4.reduce ACC and value. And I'm going to return ACC times value. And console log the answer. Let's run that. So we've got 111 and 10 from the last time. The new result is 403, 4712. We'll just believe that that's true. The next one is 24. We should be able to verify that one. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 3 is 6, and 6 times 4 is 24, last time I checked. All right, so we've got that working. So that's how that works. And then let's move on to the last example here. Compute the average of all the values in set 3. This one's a little more involved because to compute the average, it's a little more involved. You have to compute the sum of all the numbers, and then you have to divide by the number of elements there were. So let's see how we can use reduce to accomplish this. So I'm going to say that the answer is equal to set3.reduce. And this time, I'm going to need the accumulator. I'm going to want the value. I'm also going to want, I don't really need the index. I still have to have a placeholder or something in this position. So I'll say index or I. And what I need is the array, okay? And actually, I do need the index. So we'll take a look at this. And also, this is going to be a little more complicated logic. So I'm not going to be doing the implicit return shorthand here, the implied return shorthand. So what I want to do here is I'm going to say, basically, I'm going to say accumulator plus equals value. So I'm not returning yet, right? I'm incrementing the accumulator. So I'm saying, all right, accumulator, let's go ahead and get you adjusted for what you need to be on the next time, the next go around. So increase the accumulator, we're not returning yet. And I'm going to check and see, I need to check and see if I'm finished, if I'm on the last number. So I can say if I, so this is why I need the index, if I is less than array.length minus 1. So the last item in an array is always array.length minus 1. So if we're less than that, that means we have more to go. So what I'm going to do is return ACC. Else, this means that we are on the last item. We are finished. So if that's the case, then what I want to do is return ACC divided by ARR.length. So we're kind of doing two things here. We're building up the sum as we go. So just looking at this and this, just looking at what I've selected, it's a little more verbose, but technically we're doing the same thing. As we're going along, we're increasing the accumulator. At the end, we return the accumulator so that it keeps building up as we move on. The difference here is that I'm checking, and when I hit the last element, I go ahead and increase the accumulator one last time, but I'm not returning the accumulator for next time. What I'm doing is I'm returning a final result. What is the accumulator? It's this ballooned sum that we've been creating, and I'm dividing by the number of elements in the original array, which is why I wanted this fourth parameter here in my callback. So ARR.length. And this should yield the average. So let's go ahead and console log that. All right, I'm going to run my code. And I got 22.2. Sounds about right. So that is the average of all the values in set 3. So this is how reduce works. This is something you might not use often, but it is something that's useful to know, and it's a powerful function. Has lots of different use cases, particularly with numbers like this, but I'm sure there are lots of interesting things you'll come across that are using the reduce function, and I hope you enjoy using it.